My first video on Yuta vs Toji was pretty poorly received, all things considered. The follow-up video on the things I was wrong about was better received considering a lot of the corrections and clarifications I made. At least if someone didn't agree with me at that point, they could see where I was coming from. Making a third video on this was never planned, and spoilers for the manga. But Yuta is doing things in his fight with Sukuna that I think changed some things, as well as probably training over the 19-day time skip and revealing his domain and what exactly it does. So with all this new information, I thought it'd be a good idea to revisit the topic and discuss how things have changed. Also, just to avoid comments like this, Yuta is stronger than Toji, so if you were looking for an answer to that, there you go. But the fight is more of a bad matchup than it is two equal combatants just trying to go at it. For now, let's start with everything new for Yuta. Oh yeah, and subscribe. The domain's name, at least officially, is Authentic Mutual Love, which does seemingly confirm that Rika is needed in order for him to use it. Both in Sendai Colony and against Sukuna, when Yuta is using his domain expansion, we get to see the ring flash, indicating its involvement, and we also know that Yuta has to begin his connection with Rika through the ring in order to activate the curse techniques he's copied. So while Rika doesn't need to be inside the domain, she and Yuta's connection has to be active for him to use it. Inside of his domain, the way it seems is that Yuta can use a curse technique that he has copied in any one of the hundreds of swords lying on the ground in his domain, and with one usage that sword disappears. Some people seem convinced that Yuta loses access to the technique he copied once he uses it imbued in a sword, and while I guess I'm not opposed to that being the case since it'd sort of be like a binding vow trade-off, I think that would be a downgrade to his technique. Considering we've seen Yuta use sky manipulation at least on 2 occasions outside of his domain, so if he loses it with one use of a thin icebreaker inside the domain, that kinda sucks. So for the sake of this video, I won't be considering this possibility, so assume Yuta still has this technique and inside of his domain can spam sky manipulations and any applications of it like thin icebreaker. One thing that is very clear though is after a technique is used on one of the swords, Yuta loses that sword. You can see it disappearing from his hand. Another thing people have sort of convinced themselves of is that each sword in this domain represents a copied curse technique, but that also doesn't make any sense. We know that Yuta has copied curse speech at this point in time, so I don't really know how that could be imbued into a sword strike, unless he somehow taught a sword how to talk, which I mean, I guess isn't impossible since you can imbue curses into swords, but it'd definitely be weird. One thing that sort of stands out to me about this domain though is just how strong Yuta would be if this domain clashed with another person's. Typically, since the sure hits cancel out, the two people would be in a deadlock until one sure hit came back due to whoever got weakened first and collapsed the domain. But since Yuta can just pile on curse techniques he's copied without the need of his sure hit, if you get stuck in there with him, he just cooks you. To emphasize what I'm saying, let's take a look at another multiple curse technique user, Kenjaku. While it's not directly copying, he does have multiple curse techniques. His domain is nothing like this, and the sure hit for it is Kaori Itadori's technique, which isn't even active all the time. We see very clearly he has to activate it and use it on Yuki. Even if he does have an open barrier domain, if Yuta just doesn't let up on him with unlimited copied curse techniques, then he won't get a chance to crush Yuta's barrier from the outside. See what I mean? It's kind of insane, but onto the main point of this in explaining Yuta's domain, there are things we need to talk about in relation to Toji and how it factors into this fight. As everyone knows by Maki's fight with Naoya, unless Maki or Toji consent to it, they can't be trapped inside of a domain. So we're going to have to make an in-character decision here for Toji as to if he will go inside the domain or not, since even if the sure hit can't recognize him, Yuta most definitely can with his copied curse techniques. Before even getting into what Toji would do in character, let's make it clear and say that if Toji goes into this domain, he is cooked. Yuta's thin icebreaker was able to damage Sukuna through his hollow wicker basket, which is a technique like simple domain which amplifies your durability against oncoming curse techniques. While one could argue that maybe hollow wicker basket doesn't share the same aspect as simple domain due to it coming before simple domain, I'd say that I disagree. Hollow wicker basket, regardless, is still a shell of cursed energy around your body made to protect you from the sure hits of a domain. And as we all know, domains have a massive output, so over time they chip away at simple domains and techniques alike because those techniques simply can't keep up with the output of a real domain. Even within this domain, Sukuna is having to constantly maintain his hand signs for hollow wicker basket, taking away one of his greatest advantages over other sorcerers, that being his 2 sets of arms. Aside from this, Thin Icebreaker is unguardable. Yuta mentions in his fight with Oro how the time he was hit by a Thin Icebreaker, they blew past his guard. So while Toji does have a spear that can negate curse techniques, if he sticks it out to block Yuta's oncoming Thin Icebreaker, he's going to get fried by it just spawning on him instead of traveling at him. While Toji is extremely durable from having a heavily restricted body and curse resistance, I doubt that we're going to say he's as much of a physical tank as Sukuna, even while Sukuna is in this weakened state that he's in. Even if you do say that Toji could sit inside this domain and handle unlimited Thin Icebreakers for 5 minutes until Yuta's connection causes him to drop his domain, which is kind of absurd, take into account the possibility Yuta and Rika's connection has strengthened over the 19-day time skip when everyone was training, and now they can maintain it for even longer than 5 minutes. Not some insane time like an hour or anything, but let's take a reasonable number and just take into account the fact that domains will expand your curse technique's potential to 120%, essentially boosting it by 20% or 1/5. That's an entire extra minute that Yuta has to just spam techniques, and as much as I'd like to say it, I just don't see Toji surviving in a situation like that. But okay, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about what would happen with Toji in character. Would he enter Yuta's domain? The answer is both yes and no. It really is a coin flip for me, and I'll explain in detail how I see it could go both ways. Toji's faced with two decisions during hidden inventory worth looking at when considering what he'd do. One is his decision to unalive Geto, and the other is his decision to take on Gojo for a second time. Geto is what I think is the more relevant example here, because Toji says he won't unalive him on the sole basis that he doesn't know what would happen to the curses he controls, and he would rather avoid the extra trouble. Against Gojo though, Toji specifically mentions how out of character it is for him to have taken the second fight against Gojo, because he doesn't work for free and he was fighting for pride, which caused him to deviate from his true self. Taking both of these into account, it seems unlikely to me that Toji would choose to willingly enter this domain. It seems like he doesn't like going through extra trouble in a fight if he doesn't have to. However, this doesn't have to be seen as extra trouble. We saw in the fight with Curse Spirit Naoya that Maki, when choosing to willingly enter Naoya's domain, could strike him from behind with her soul-splitting sword before even fully spawning into the domain. If this is the case, summoning his domain might be a worse choice for Yuta than just leaving it inactive, as even if Toji doesn't immediately take Yuta out in one strike from his sword, imagining a scenario like when he stabbed Gojo and misplaced it, sufficient damage to your body will cause you to drop your domain expansion. We saw that repeatedly in Gojo vs Sukuna. This, however, is not the end-all be-all, or at least it doesn't have to be. Obviously, Yuta has access to Rika, which is basically giving him all the curse energy he needs to use reverse curse technique. And not only that, but Yuta was just shown by Gojo and Sukuna how to heal his brain and get his curse technique off cooldown, possibly allowing him to summon domain again. While normally sorcerers aren't able to summon their domain more than once a day, I think Yuta is another exception to this rule. It's mentioned in the Gojo vs Sukuna fight by Yuta himself that Sukuna has 2 times more curse energy than him, or maybe more. The fact he says maybe more kind of leads me to believe it's closer to 2 times than 3 times, so we'll safely say Sukuna has 2 times more curse energy than Yuta. Sukuna was able to expand his domain a total of 3 different times in the fight with Gojo. He broke Gojo's first 3 domains all with the same one and then summoned 2 more. This is not to mention he had the cursed energy to summon another one, it just exploded because his brain got fried in the Unlimited Void. Yuta is even talking about how Sukuna could open his domain again soon, so that's 4 possible domain expansions in one day for Sukuna, at the bare minimum. So if Yuta has half his cursed energy, he should be able to do at least 2. That's also if you go with the interpretation that when Yuta says Sukuna has 2 times more cursed energy than him, he's talking about him and Rika, because if he's not including how Rika can refill his cursed energy pool, then Yuta could definitely do domain more than once a day. Just to mention as well, even without healing his burnt out curse technique using the brain frying method, which probably isn't in character for Yuta anyway, since he says doing it once is too dangerous, Yuta's technique replenishes really fast. We know in Sendai Colony, Yuta can only maintain a connection with Rika for 5 minutes. He summoned his domain after making the connection and regained his curse technique before the timer was up as well. So at best, his curse technique is burnt out for less than 5 minutes and he can do domain yet again Or not, because like I said, it's not exactly the best move to use on Toji. If Toji does plan on spawning in late to catch Yuta from behind, if he doesn't misplace his strike, because that only happening is Gojo due to him being rusty, he can literally split Yuta in two since his sword ignores durability. Also, just to mention, obviously it's not a question about reanimated Toji if he would enter the domain. We literally see that guy just walk into one, so yeah. Up to now, I've been very clearly ignoring a pretty important aspect of this battle, and that's the fact that it's not a 1v1, it's a 2v1 with both Rika and Yuta versus Toji. Rika's involvement in this fight is absolutely crucial for two reasons that a simple perspective shift would let you see. Let's assume for a second that both Toji and Yuta are equal as combatants and in physical stats. Then Toji has his worm that stores cursed tools, but Yuta has basically the same thing, except his worm is special grade and also holds cursed techniques inside of it. It gets especially eye-opening when you see that using Rika, Yuta was able to open up Sukuna for a strike on his stomach, but that's more of a generous interpretation because it's not like Sukuna was really defenseless. He managed to get some slashes on Yuta while this was happening, and he still had an arm free that he didn't use for defense, but it's still pretty cool that Yuta did it and Rika wasn't even fully manifested. I've also been ignoring up to this point that Yuta can use cursed speech, but I really don't think this is as relevant to the fight as everyone likes to think it is for a couple reasons, those being accuracy and potency. First, let's start with what cursed speech is. Cursed speech is words with spirit. Essentially, it's infusing sound with cursed energy. You can defend against this attack by using cursed energy on your brain and ears to protect them, but obviously for someone without cursed energy, this method just isn't possible. To touch on my first reason, that being accuracy, I'm skeptical of if cursed speech would ever be able to even hit Toji, because not only is cursed speech literally just sound which Toji can move faster than, and not just faster than, he can move at the bare minimum 3 times faster than sound just due to scaling to Maki, who can evade cursed spirit Naoya at Mach 3 speeds. And if you don't know, sound is Mach 1. Just think of every Mach as multiplying the speed of sound, which is 767 miles per hour or 343 meters per second. You may be thinking from this that the sound is undodgeable because it's an AoE attack, but that isn't exactly true for cursed speech. Yuta mentions in volume 0 how the technique is hard to control because energy spreads and it's hard to be accurate. And seeing as he was hitting curses who weren't even in his line of sight, like these curses behind him and inside of the building, I'd venture to say he's targeting them by using the cursed energy that they possess, which I think is more than fair to say. So Toji is faster than sound, and the way Yuta targets people with cursed speech, Toji doesn't possess, that being cursed energy. This isn't to say Yuta can't use his eyes to direct the sound, it's just to say that even if he does do that, which isn't provable, Toji could probably dodge it. Now, to talk about potency, we're going to have to imagine a scenario where cursed speech actually does hit Toji. For one, Toji has a resistance to curses that already lowers the potency of whatever technique is going to be used. Just to give a few examples to this, Toji can swallow a curse and put it in his stomach, which Gege makes note of as due to his resistance to curses in the fan book. In perfect preparation, we see that Maki is able to see through Naoya's projection sorcery by counting the frames which she attributes to the new body she's acquired. There is obviously the fact that they are immune to domain expansions on 2 levels, both not being recognized by the sure hit and not being able to be trapped without their consent. You can take these last 2 as feats of durability if you want to, or endurance, but against the zen'in clan, Maki completely ignored Ranta's technique to hold her in place, and in chapter 213, while not in the original chapter release, when Gege added to this chapter with the release of the volume that contains it, we see that not only did Maki tank 15 Fingers Sukuna's New Lightning Blast, Sukuna says it did no damage to her even though it landed a direct hit. Obviously this curse resistance doesn't mean they can handle anything thrown at them. We see that Hollow Purple rips through Toji's chest. I'm just saying it's probable, and if not probable, at the very least arguable, that cursed speech is not going to hit or work on Toji. Now, entertaining the scenario where it does work on him, and say Yuta says don't move, the same way he did to Oro. After this hits Oro, Rika and Yuta barrage her with punches, and while there is visible damage, she's mostly okay even though Yuta was using a cursed tool. I'd say personally that Toji is more durable than Uro, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. In the end, you could think either one of them wins. The point of this video, and the last one I made, is that it's not going to be an easy fight for either one of them. Acting as if one stomps the other is just ridiculous. I didn't even talk about their full arsenals in this one. Toji has his precognition, he could possibly shatter Yuta's domain barrier with the inverted spear of heaven. Yuta might be able to use Angel's technique to target the curse technique in Toji's soul split katana and take away its special effect to negate their ability. I mostly left those out because their inclusion is kind of unknown, mostly due to them being out of character. The outcome of the fight could really be 50-50. It's just such a weird matchup. You don't see too many fights where domain expansion might be a bad thing to use on the other opponent. You get what I mean? It's just not certain, but I hope you enjoyed the video and have a nice day.